I got a couple of confessions for you. A couple of things you might not know about me. A couple of things that might shock and appall you. First of them is this. I love wrestling. Not like Olympic wrestling, but like fake wrestling. Professional wrestling, like WWE, more than a 32-year-old man should. Like, I'll stay up late to watch like the ones that are happening in Japan. I'm super into it, podcasts. Maybe there's other people here who are into that, but I feel like it's a little bit of one of those things that I kind of hide, but I also like just don't really care anymore. But there's been times in my life where I thought like I shouldn't tell anybody that, and maybe you feel that way, but too bad, I just did, and that's what I do. I really enjoy it. Second one is this. If you get in my truck and I say to you, which I often do, oh, sorry, it's just a little messy this week. It always is like that. It's never not been like that. It's never not going to be like that. I'm a messy person, and I'm learning to accept that. Just is what it is. I basically look like I'm living in my truck. That's confession number 2. And getting that off my chest, I actually feel way better about my life. Third one is this. I like Arby's. I got a couple of woos, and one guy's like, what? Arby's? And he just walks out, leaves. I can't come to this church. I can't trust this guy. I like Arby's, and I'm really tired of Arby's getting a bad rap. I don't eat fast food often, but if you haven't ever had a beef and cheddar and some curly fries, you are missing out on some of the basic levels of happiness in the human experience. Arby's is great, and I will not stand for the Arby's slander that has been picked up by my ears in the recent years. Arby's is fantastic. The last one is this, that when I eat pizza, and I recognized this actually just a couple days ago, I don't eat pizza until I'm full. I eat pizza until I hate myself. Have you ever been there? For me, pizza is like this thing that you just keep eating it, and then as I reach for, like, I'm full, like I'm bloated, I'm physically, visibly ill at this point. And like there's still pizza on the table, and I reach for the pizza, and even if I'm by myself, I'll say just quietly, just loud enough that my own mind can pick it up. Just one more. Just one more. 5 or 6 one mores later, I'm on the brink of calling 911 because I'm about to explode. I'm about to go into cardiac arrest. That is my problem with pizza. Confessions can be good. They release you from the shame of the truths of your life. But sometimes that can be a little bit difficult. I want to tell you a story. I used to work at Shiloh Youth Ranch. It's now just called Shiloh, but it used to just be this camp for kids. It still exists, but it's a much broader thing now. I'm still involved with them, and we support them here at the project. Some of your financial giving that you give to the project goes towards them working with kids coming from at-risk situations, marginalized homes. It's a great organization, but I was about 20 years old, maybe 10, 12 years ago. It was my first job not in the city, not working construction. And it's out at this ranch north of Fort Saskatchewan, and it's really great. And I thought, you know what? I'm trying to figure out who I am as an adult. I'm 20 years old. I'm like, you know what? I'm going out to this ranch. Maybe this is the start of a new life for me. I'm gonna be a cowboy. Like, I'm as city as it gets. I ain't been around any country stuff at all. I like all music except for country music. That's like the one that I've never really gotten into. But I thought, this might be it for me. I'm gonna get myself a cowboy hat. I'm gonna get myself some Wranglers. I'm gonna put on some cowboy boots, a big old belt buckle. And this is gonna be the start of a new life for me. I'm gonna start riding horses. I'm gonna join the rodeo, tour the country, riding bulls or throwing ropes at cows or whatever. I don't know exactly what they do at rodeos, but that was gonna be my life. That's what I was gonna do. I was gonna be that guy, and I was going to be a real cowboy. Now, my first day we showed up, we go up to the barn and there's all these horses, and we had an outside rental, kind of like this company doing some team building stuff. And they're walking around, really, I don't know how you build a team walking around a sand pit on a horse, but that's what they were doing. And they're walking around and it's really slow, like no one's jumping over fences. This isn't equestrian stuff. This is just basic, get on the back of the horse and stay on the back of the horse. Now, this is pretty safe for most situations. We're working with children. And when you're working with children and inexperienced riders, you want to have horses that are not overly eager. So most of our horses, it's kind of like a retirement home for horses. Like they're really old, they're at the end of their lives. Some of them might even be like blind or deaf. And instead of them having to be put down, we kind of give them a second chance and they slowly walk around. Like the general pace of a horse at Shiloh is not like a bucking bronco. Like it's more like a do 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 do, like that, like really slow, methodical, boring horse. And that's what we want. But it doesn't matter how boring and slow and old a horse is. If there's one thing that I've learned in my life about horses, which is minimal, but if there's one thing that I've learned about horses, it's this. They're not the most emotionally stable animals. If you've ever spent any time around a horse, it's like a cool breeze goes by and they freak out. A bug flies by and they start losing their mind. The sun's in the wrong spot in the sky and they freak right out. They're dangerous in those situations. So you always have to be careful. I remember one time I went running in, someone's like, Jeff, grab that barrel over there. I'm like, okay, I'll bring it into the horse riding arena. I picked it up above my head because that was the most comfortable, Stanley Cup position. And I'm walking in and the horses start losing their minds and people are like, what are you doing? Why would you do that? I'm like, why would I do what? Bring in the thing you asked me? Well, if the horses are scared of that. I'm like, how am I supposed to know what horses are thinking? Like, it just didn't make sense. So this family, this group of people are at the ranch and they're on these horses. And I don't know what it was, but something set off one of these horses. And this guy who had never really ridden a horse before kind of freaked out. There's just a little jolt, and then he freaked out, he yelled, and then the horse started freaking out a little bit more, and it actually kind of kicked up a bit, and he kind of fell off to the side, and the horse starts jumping and running, and I'm telling you, it was one of the scariest things I've ever experienced. You know when you're like sliding on ice, as I think all of us have experienced maybe today because the roads are terrifying right now, and everything goes in slow motion. You get into fight or flight mode, and it's like, it's maybe 10 seconds, but it feels like forever. This is what that felt like in this moment. The horse is running, and the guy is kind of hanging off to the side, and every time the horse jumps a little bit more, this guy falls off a little bit more, and a little bit more, and I'm thinking in my head, in this brief moment, just let go, man. Just let go. Like, he would have fallen, he would have hit the ground, and it would have sucked, but he would have been okay. But the longer he hung on, the longer he held on to the reins, he went more and more to the side until he was basically almost on the ground being dragged, and the horse's feet are basically almost hitting him and stomping him, and I'm freaking out like this is gonna end really poorly, and finally, he just stopped and let go. He hit the ground, he took his lumps. It sucked, but he was largely unhurt. He just had a few bruises or something like that. And needless to say, in that moment, my dreams of being a cowboy died. And I decided, I'm gonna stick to motorized means of transportation. Go-karts, things like that. Anything's better than this because at least, even though my car may not start in -40, it's not going to lose its mind and thrust me out of eject me out of the seat. So that was my issue with horses. And that's my, continued beef. I'm still involved, but when I go to the camp, I keep my distance from the barn. And I think that's just wise. Last week, we talked about the value of solitude, of spending time alone, of getting rid of the distractions in your life, getting rid of the noise around you, and going and spending time in silence, as uncomfortable as that may be, away from everything else, and spending time with God. So you can kind of have this face-to-face time with God, this checkpoint to get regular and more aligned with Jesus, and to have your life reflect Jesus more. So this week, we're gonna be continuing this kind of conversation that we're having about these different hacks you can add to your life, these different disciplines or habits that will make your life better. So what do you do next? Is that it? Just to go spend time alone in solitude, to be by yourself? Is that it? Like if you just kind of go and talk to God, is that the pinnacle of a Jesus-based life? Is that what's gonna fix your life completely? Is that what brings alignment with Jesus? Well, as we go through the next step, I wanna talk to you about kind of the next phase of that. The additional hack that will actually bring this all together and bring the value together. And that is the habit or the life hack of confession. Now, maybe in the past, your idea of confession, that brings up a lot of different words or different pictures or emotions. Maybe if you grew up in some different church backgrounds, you think of a confessional booth or something like that. We don't do that here. We believe that our connection to Jesus is interpersonal. It's you and Jesus. It's you and God. We don't have any connecting points between that or anyone to do that for you. Maybe it's just like not a word you really think about a lot, like to confess something. Like how often do you truly confess to doing something? You know, I'm not talking about admitting you like Arby's. I'm talking about confessing serious things in your life. There's a famous quote by Augustine of Hippo, and he says this: "The confession of evil works is the first beginning of good works." What he's saying is that you can't fight the monster in front of you if you don't acknowledge the monster and recognize that you need to change it. And you need to get rid of it. And listen, confession isn't something that we're really drawn to. It's not a word that really brings up good emotions, right? It's not something that we want to do all that much, because by nature it means you're admitting that you did something wrong, which just is not something that we like to do. I don't know about you, I like being right. I love being right. I hate being proven wrong. It's just this part of us being humans that we don't want to ever experience, is being proven wrong. It's why as humans we're more likely to hide our weakness out of fear than to face the music. We'd rather cling on to this sense of us being perfect and nobody knows our flaws, and not facing the music, not shining light on our failures and working on them, than to actually work on them. So how about you? How about in your life? Think of even just your last week, your last month, your last year, when you are faced with your own mistakes, your own flaws, your own dark secrets, the things that nobody else knows, maybe big, maybe small, depending how you feel about them or what your life is like right now. Do you like to face them? Or are you more likely to cling to them, to hide them in the dark, to just kind of pretend they're not there? What is your habit when it comes to confessing your problems? What is your default setting? Where do you go when life gets hard? What do you do? One fact that I can tell you is this: as much as we don't want to admit it, as much as we don't want to confess it, as much as we want to hide from it and pretend it's not true, every single one of us in this room, on this planet, anywhere, we're all broken people. And that's not something our culture likes to hear. It's not something any of us like to hear as humans, that we're all broken. We all have issues. And there's this trend of, if you tell me that I'm wrong, you're a bad person. You're mean. You can't tell me that there's anything wrong with my life. That's just rude and wrong. That to set any sort of moral standard or any act is wrong is an act of injustice towards other people. But the fact is that it's your vices, while they may be yours alone, you don't get to determine what is good and what is bad. Sometimes we actually have to have a kind of another standard within that. And as much as it's a popular thing to say, the idea that only God can judge me, often we don't even want God to judge us. We don't want anyone to judge us, because if you judge me, you're being mean to me, and we are uncomfortable with that conversation happening. But like I said, the reality is we are all broken. We all have equally chosen sin. Everyone in this room, we have sinned. We sin regularly. It's what separates us from God through our choices. We're all on the same page. None of us are different. And this is really clearly explained and really clearly shown in the Bible in a document called Romans. And there's a pastor named Paul who wrote this to the church in Rome. And we catch up with him in Romans 3:10-18. And he says this: "What shall we conclude then? Do we have any advantage? Not at all. For we have already made the charge that Jews and Gentiles alike are under the power of sin. As it is written, there is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. All have turned away. They have together become worthless. There is no one who does good, not even one. Their throats are open graves. Their tongues practice deceit. The poison of vipers is on their lips." He's really not pulling any punches here. "Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and misery marks their ways, and the way of peace they do not know. There is no fear of God before their eyes." It's not a very hopeful conversation he's having there, right? Like, that's a little uncomfortable. He's not pulling punches. He's saying things like their mouths are their tongues that practice deceit, their throats are open graves. Their lips have the poison of vipers on it. Like, this isn't like a happy-go-lucky, like, encouraging thing. But he's not trying to be a downer here. What Paul is trying to tell people who are reading this is that we all fall into the same category. It doesn't matter if you're a Jew or a Gentile. It doesn't matter if you live in China or Russia or Africa or Canada, where you come from, your socioeconomic background. It doesn't matter what you are, where you've been, who you are. We are all human beings. We are all equally under the fault of sin. For me to say that you are a sinner is not a statement of judgment on you. It's actually a statement of equality. It's a statement that we all fall under the same umbrella, that we all need something more than what we can do on our own, that nobody is good enough just the way that we are. Pastor Paul says clearly that when it comes to God's standards, from the murderer to the liar, to the porn addicted, to the alcoholic, to any sinner of any kind, the person who's full of pride, selfishness, we all fall under the same umbrella. All have turned away, and there is no one who does good. Again, you might be thinking, Jeff, you sound super negative tonight. Like, can you give me a break? It's been really cold recently. This is the reality of the human condition. This is what we face. This is what, as Christians, as followers of Jesus, we are constantly battling back and forth. And I think that every single one of us can think of something in our lives. It's like, this has been the struggle. I hear you. This is the struggle I've been living with, this thing, this sin, this vice, whatever it is, this addiction. There's something that we all can fill in the blank with here tonight that we are experiencing regularly and that we don't feel good about ourselves with. Every human since the first humans to walk the earth have sinned. And when measured against God's standard, we've all fallen short. Every single one of them. And those last couple of verses might make you feel like there's literally no hope. And through most of human history, that's kind of how God's people would have felt. But through the relentless pursuit of God via Jesus coming to earth and dying on the cross, we now have this available thing to us, this unconditional forgiveness for literally anything that we've done, that if we would just accept Jesus and follow him and model our lives after him, that we can be forgiven for those things. If we confess to Jesus that all the problems in our lives, and if we modify our lives to be more in alignment with Jesus, we can have eternal life, and we don't have to have the death that we deserve from the choices that we make. That's really what it means to be a Christian in a nutshell. Maybe you're here for the first time, you're watching online, you're listening on the podcast, whatever it is, and you've never really heard what it means to be a Christian, to follow Jesus, to subscribe to a Jesus-based life. At the end of the day, it really just means we're all broken, we all screw up, and Jesus came to earth and died a death that he didn't deserve, that we deserved the punishment, but he took our place. And if we would follow Jesus, acknowledge Jesus as the God of our life, and actually follow his example and model our lives after it, do our best, even though we'll fall and have to get back up and try again, but if we do our best and try to be like Jesus, to follow Jesus, and to have Jesus be the Lord of our lives, we can have eternal life with God. It's incredibly complicated in theology, but in practice and in the way that we can actually adopt it is incredibly, incredibly simple. So if we're all in the same boat, nobody's better than anyone else, and if forgiveness is available to every single one of us, why is it so hard to confess? Not just to other people around us, but why is it so hard to confess to ourselves, but even more to even God, who is everywhere? God knows every act we've ever done. God is not somebody that we just talk about. God is not somebody that we talk about like he's not in the room. God is with us at all times. He is everywhere. He's not some person that we only have to worry about what we say and do when we're around them. It's not like when you go over to your grandma's house or your religious aunt's house and you have to be careful what words you use or what political references you make. God knows. He knows your thoughts. He knows your heart. He knows your actions. He still loves you. And sometimes I think about that. I'm like, man, like he still loves me in spite of that. But why is it that we're so tempted to never actually be honest and confess and to acknowledge the flaws in our lives? I think this is the biggest one. You seemingly live a decent life without making a change. So what do I mean by that? Well, like, look at your life. It's really easy to have sin. We sometimes talk in church like, oh, if you have sin in your life, everything's gonna fall apart. You know, there's that old song by Johnny Cash, and it goes like, you can run on for a long time, run on for a long time, run on for a long time. Sooner or later, God will cut you down. Oh, it's kind of an aggressive song. You know, it sounds really cool, but it's this aggressive song. And does that mean that like God's like, oh, I saw your browser history, lightning bolt? No. He's not just this God who's trying to cut you down and hurt you and looking for every turn and every opportunity to ruin you for your mistakes. And because of that, we can fall into this lull, this spiritual lull that, well, I've been dealing with this perpetual sin. There's this habit. There's this thing that I've been doing regularly. There's this character flaw in my life that I've never really dealt with. It's in the back of my mind. I know it's there. It's constant. But like, my life doesn't suck. You know, God's never thrown a lightning bolt at me. I didn't drop dead every time I participate in that sin. I don't know if it's really that big of a deal. And we kind of get into this habitual pattern of just doing that same thing over and over again. And life goes well, or we get the job, we graduate school. Well, like, I guess it's not that big of a deal. Maybe God doesn't actually care about that sin. Maybe when they were interpreting the Bible, they were like, well, it's not, you know, maybe we just put a little bit too much emphasis on that. We try and convince ourselves that our sin is not that big of a deal and that we don't need to deal with it. We don't need to acknowledge it. We don't need to confess it, certainly, and then we don't need to deal with it and act on that. But the fact is, your life eventually will change because of it. And while it may not be a cataclysmic moment, it may not be like that song, God cutting you down, it will slowly rot away at your soul, at your mind, at your heart. It will change the way that you interact with your spouse, your boyfriends, girlfriends, your family, your friends, your coworkers. It will rot you from the inside out, and it will change the way you see the world. It will change the way you see other people. It will change the way that you interact with the world around you, and it will make you not a good person. And it will eventually lead your life into a place you don't want to be. It might take a long time. It might not be, like I said, cataclysmic, but it will happen eventually. It's like a cancer under the skin that you can't see, but it's eating you up. It's ruining your soul. It's ruining you at all times, even though you cannot fully see it or quantify it in the moment. If you don't deal with it, if you don't acknowledge it, you will reap the benefits of it. We reap the benefits of our lives, actions, and what we choose and don't choose, whether it's positive or negative. The other one is that I think we're too proud to admit that we have a problem. Pride is such a human issue. You know, there's that old proverb that pride comes before the fall. And in so many areas, that's true. We see that in sports where proud people, they let their guard down in a fight, in a boxing match, because they don't take their opponent seriously. And next thing you know, the lesser opponent might knock out that boxer. Because they weren't aware. When we're proud, we let our guard down to the dangers and the threats in our lives. And if you're proud, you are letting yourself be taken advantage of by all sorts of dangerous things. If pride is the primary thing that you live your life out of, if you're proud, not like I'm proud of myself, be proud of yourself, but pride of that I am too good to fail. Pride that I am better than other people. I'm proud, I have this pride that I could never sin. I would never fall into that addiction. I would never get addicted to porn or alcohol, or I'd never get addicted to drugs, or I would never cheat on my spouse or my boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever it is. Pick whatever you need to fill in the blanks. If you're too proud, you're not on guard of the things that are trying to come at you. If you don't acknowledge a threat in your life, you're gonna let the guard down. You're gonna leave the gate open and let it in. There are real threats out there. Threats to your soul, threats to your life, and if you are too proud to acknowledge those things, you leave yourself open to disaster. So do you? Are you proud? Is pride an issue in your life? Is that something that you need to chip away at, to chisel away the pride in your life, to be able to just say who you actually are and be real with yourself and be real with God? Another one is I think we're just scared of being exposed. We live in a culture, we live in a society where nobody wants to admit the brokenness that we have. We actually live in a world where we're increasingly, the philosophy is that it's actually the systems around us that break us down. It's actually the systems around us that are bad. We don't want to acknowledge that we could be the problem. The fact is that we are broken, and while some systems may be better than others, we are the problem, and every system is going to have us in it. So they're all going to be broken at some point. And we don't want to expose ourselves to that. If we admit that, then we're exposing that we are just not as good as maybe we've been presenting on our social media, on our Instagram, our TikToks, whatever. We're not giving the full version of ourselves in most areas of life. And if we show that we are not great, that we don't have it all together, that we need help, if we confess and give truth to even just to God, not to just other people, we're exposing ourselves as less than what we've presented. And that's a hard pill to swallow. But if we're not willing to swallow that pill, we're never going to get better. Is the fear of exposing who you really are, of coming out of hiding, holding you back from your relationship with Jesus? We would rather cling to a false feeling of security than to let go, take our lumps, and get back up and move forward. The reality is this: we hide from confession because we're scared of exposing ourselves as less than adequate. Our insecurity on display, and we have no choice but to act on it one way or another. Well, we may say we want to change. We don't really want to. We don't really want to change. The stuff that we are living in, the garbage that we're sitting in, it may be stinky, it may be gross, but it's the garbage I know. The horrible situation that I'm in, it's comfortable. We've been here for a while. I'm just kind of happy to stay here because I know it. And I don't know the amount of work it would take to do more. This rut is pretty, I complain about it, I say I want to change it, I feel I want to change it, but I'm not willing to put in the work. And they may seem fine, but living like this is like getting a chip on your windshield. You're thinking this is fine. This isn't a big deal. I'm fine. The world around me, I could have more out of life, but I'm really content with where I am. This windshield analogy is something that I really believe in. Have you ever had a crack on your windshield? I have way too many. I just got a new truck a year ago, and there's 50 now. It's it's a magnet for rocks to hit, and it drives me crazy. But when you have one on your windshield, you look at that first little spot and you're like, oh, that's unfortunate, but you don't really notice it. It's not a big deal. And the next thing you know, it's kind of a cold day comes and it splinters out across. You're like, well, that's annoying, especially when the sun's in my face. But I kind of forget about it. Then another chip hits. It's not that big of a deal. It's annoying. Man. And then another one happens, and another one happens, and then you get a big one, right? And it just spiders one day, and it's just all over the place. And you're like, man, I should really get this windshield changed. But it's $500. For the deductible alone, they're expensive. I'd have to take my car in. You know how inconvenient that is. It's -30. I don't want to go for extra drive. You know what? Not a big deal. And the longer we go with that, the longer we go day to day with this destroyed windshield, you actually don't even notice it. My windshield right now is pretty cracked. But I don't notice it ever unless I think about it. Unless a new one comes, I don't really notice it at all. And I could just go about my life and drive, and it wouldn't be an issue at all. The inconvenience of getting it fixed is really what holds me back. But eventually, I can just kind of convince myself that it's not even there and that life doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to my day-to-day life. But here's something I didn't know until relatively recently. Did you know that your windshield plays a significant role in the structural integrity of your vehicle in an accident? And that at a certain point, having cracks and a broken up windshield, I'm not saying one little spot, but at some point it actually lessens the safety of your entire vehicle. There's something, I don't know who designed it this way, but there is a factor when you have a full quality functioning windshield where if you get in an accident, it actually stabilizes some of the rest of the vehicle. And if you have these cracks, what seems like one crack at the beginning, what kind of just grows over time that you actually ignore in your life, and you ignore and don't want to change and don't want to fix, it actually puts you in grave danger. You're flying down the highway, ignorant of the danger that's in front of you. And we often do that with sin. Just a little bit here, it's a little bit there. It's growing, but I'm just going to put it in the back of my mind. I actually can't even see it, really, if I don't think about it. If I pretend that it's not there, if I put my fingers in my ears and go, la, 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 whatever, life is good, I don't need to worry about it, then I'll be fine. But we're flying down that highway of life, and we don't even realize that there's an impending danger right in front of us. and we don't want to do anything about it. Pastor Paul says again in the book of Ephesians to the church in Ephesus, in chapter 1, verses 7 to 8, in him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins in accordance with the riches of God's grace that he lavished on us with all wisdom and understanding. We don't have to hide. We don't have to pretend like we have it all together. You don't have to pretend anymore. You don't have to play the game. You're not exposing yourself, especially when we're just talking about God. God isn't impressed by the presentation of your life. God isn't impressed by the Instagram filter you put over your whole lifestyle. He's not fooled, and he doesn't care. He knows you with all of your flaws. He knows you with every mistake you make. He knows all of the character issues you have, all the things that you don't like about yourself, physically, emotionally, character-wise. He knows all of it, and he still loves you, and he still loved you enough that Jesus decided to die on the cross for you. And I say this regularly because it's true and it's important, is that I can comprehend that some human, one person, would die to save the entire world. If I had to make that decision, it would be a difficult decision, but I think I could get my head around it, hopefully, to save every human that I have to die. Jesus did that for everyone, but he didn't just do it for the masses, he did it just for you. He said, all the torture I'm going to take, all the pain and suffering I'm going to go through, whether you're here in person or you're online, he did it for you, and you alone would have been enough. It wasn't for the masses, it was for the individual. You are worth fighting for, and he has died on the cross. His blood was shed, and that's what Paul is saying, is we have redemption through his blood, through the act on the cross, the forgiveness of sins, in accordance with the riches of God's grace. He lavishes it on us with all wisdom and understanding. You have that available to you because of what Jesus did on the cross. You don't have to pretend, you don't have to hide, you just have to be honest with God, and you have to model your life after Jesus like we talked about. Through the blood that Jesus shed on the cross, we have redemption. That's the whole reason Jesus came to earth. That was his mission, and it makes forgiveness available to us. All we have to do is confess, align our thoughts and our words with Jesus to actually do that. But that starts with admitting. Confession is an act of admittance of fault. But let's not get this twisted. It's not about guilt. God isn't someone who wants to make us feel guilty. God's Holy Spirit convicts us. And I know convict is a bad word in a lot of people's minds because you get convicted of a crime. You go to jail for a crime. But conviction in our hearts is just a realization that prompts a change in our lives. And it leads us to asking for forgiveness and then to make the adjustments to our behavior. The misconception on that, though, is that in our culture, people think that being a Christian, following a Jesus-based life, is that our faith is about judgment and behavior modification. You need to subscribe to our ethic, our politics, our worldview, and nothing else works. And there is some fine line, some very straight and narrow paths that exist within a Jesus-based life. But that's not all it's about. That's taking the wrong angle on what a Jesus-based life is. It's not about behavior modification, but the foundation of a Jesus-based life is actually about a changed heart, which then we have no choice after that, through that, to change the way that we live. Not because of some political ethic, but because we want to align our heart. And when we align our heart with Jesus, we will align our behavior accordingly, because we have no choice but to follow Jesus and to be and look and act more like him. That's how we change the world around us. That's how we shine light in the dark places in the world around us, in our community, at our work, in our families, at our schools. That's how you be the light of the world. You be Jesus to your community. But it starts with us purifying ourselves to Jesus. And not even in that term, purify, but just to say, you know what? I know and I acknowledge I'm flawed, and I need Jesus to clear my heart, to clean my soul, and to make me better so that I can be a better person and I can be more like him. God shines that light on the dark parts of our hearts because our hearts need to be changed to be more like Jesus. A Jesus-based life isn't rules we have to follow. It's a lifestyle we get to follow because we've seen Jesus, we know Jesus, and his example is worth following. In John 1:5-10, John is one of Jesus' disciples. He had a first-person account of Jesus' life. He says this: "This is the message we have heard from him and declare to you. God is light. In him there is no darkness at all. If we claim to have fellowship with him and yet walk in darkness, we lie and do not live out the truth. But if we walk in the light, and he is the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his son, purifies us from all sin. If we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. If we claim we have not sinned, we make him out to be a liar, and his word is not in us. Are you pretending? Have you been pretending? Have you been claiming that you're not sinful? Have you been kind of like, maybe not verbalizing that, but just kind of living life without a care in the world, just living with the sin and being okay with the habits in your life that you know don't align with Jesus? Again, I'm not making a statement of judgment. I'm making a statement of equality. I'm making a statement of we're in this together. We all have something that we can admit to. I'm not asking you to come up and speak your deepest, darkest secret into the microphone, but I'm asking you to evaluate your heart. I'm asking you to just really be honest with yourself. What are those things in your life that need work? What are those things in your life that you're not happy with anymore? Confession is the first step towards freedom from guilt. Confession is what will change your life. Old sin or new sin. Maybe it's the first time you've ever thought of confessing to God or telling God and repenting. Repenting is really just a word for doing a 180. I'm walking this way. I'm walking towards sin, and I want to change my life and go this way. I want to walk back towards Jesus. Maybe that's what you need to do, is to turn back to Jesus, to change your life back in the direction of Christ. For the first time or the 100th time or the first time in a long time, it's available to all of us. So here's my question to you tonight. What sin do you need to confess? You don't have to come to me. You don't have to come tell me all your secrets. You need to talk to God. What is that thing? What's that habit that eats you up when you really analyze your life, that you know you've been ignoring, that you need to fix because it's just not the right way to live, and you know you're not getting everything out of life. You know you're distanced from God because of it, but you just can't shake it because it's an addiction or a habit or something you just frankly like. What sin do you need reconciliation with Jesus from? So here's a couple of things before we move into some time to spend with God that I want to encourage you this week. One, I want you to encourage to make confession a regular part of your life. We're going to have a moment in a couple seconds here to confess to God what we need and what we've done and where we've been, and to be real with him. But do this regularly. When you pray, tell God. You know, we talk about when you accept Jesus for the first time, you confess that I'm a sinner, I've done all these things. But if it stops there, you're not going back and getting forgiveness and getting, like, your relationship doesn't restart with God. You always have that relationship with Jesus. But there is this healthy habit of going to God and being honest with him and saying, Jesus, here's the things I'm dealing with. I need your help. I need to look more like you. Also, be honest with yourself. Just examine your heart. Stop hiding from yourself. You're not going to be any better by hiding from the truth. And here's a tip. If it's something that is a regular pattern in your life, tell a trusted friend. Don't fight alone. If you're fighting alone, you're missing out on the best part of community, and that's accountability. Don't just go tell someone you just met your deepest, darkest secret, but who's somebody in your life, a family member or a friend, who you can say, here's what I'm struggling with. And I need you to just check in with me once a month or once a week. Send me a text message. How are you doing with this thing? The moment that you're honest about it is the moment you begin to get some freedom from it. And that's what Augustine of Hippo was saying. He said the confession of evil works is the first beginning of good works, because when you expose it, you can deal with it and you can move forward against it. But at the end of the day, the most important thing you need to do, and this is what I hope you walk away from here more than anything tonight, Project Community, is this. You have to just accept it. So often we fight this feeling in our hearts and our minds that we are not worthy of God's forgiveness, that we've made too many mistakes. All these things that I've done, you just don't get it, Jeff. You don't know what I've been through, where I've been, what I've done. Maybe not. God does. And God has clearly stated and said, it's not enough to keep me from you. You just have to accept Jesus. You just have to accept forgiveness. Confess where you've been. Confess what you've done. And take the forgiveness that is standing out in front of you. Grasp it and let it be real. The only thing holding you back from freedom, from guilt, from forgiveness, and from eternal life with Jesus is you. So tonight, It's time to acknowledge the cracks in the windshield. It's time to acknowledge that it's time to let go of the horse. It's time to let go, take the bump, take the pain, and then get up and be better on the other side of it. Stop clinging and putting yourself in more danger. It's time to tell God and be real with him and take down the barriers, remove the veil, and be honest with the God that created you, that knows you and loved you enough to die a horrible death on a cross so that you could be with him forever. So tonight, as we sing a couple songs, think, let the Holy Spirit speak to you. What do you need to change in your life? But tell God. Don't just recognize it in your mind. Share it to God in your heart and your spirit. And accept the freedom, the forgiveness, and just the goodness that comes from that, from a good God who loves you, forgives you, and loves you.